In today's video, you will learn about the average costs of a trip to Kruger National Park. We will show you how much we've spent by different categories, like accommodation, food, restaurant visits, and fuel. You will learn what we have spent exactly on our 23-day trip to Kruger National Park. Hopefully, you will learn by the end of the video that an extended safari trip does not have to break the bank, because you will see that our 3-week-long trip is about the same cost per person as a 1 to 2 night stay in a private safari lodge in the greater Kruger area or the Serengeti or Masai Mara. As you have noticed, we have spent a total of 22 nights or 23 days, so more than 3 weeks in total, in Kruger National Park. That is a bit extreme, I know. You don't have to do the same thing. And I know that most people will most likely not do the same thing. But this trip is perfect to give you a good idea of the average costs. So we stayed in Kruger during absolute high season. It was summer, the weather was good, there were the school holidays, and it was Christmas and New Year's Eve. So quite a busy time. But after the first few days in January, we could see that the park got less busy every day. So our first category would be food, because of course you need to eat something. We cooked a lot of our meals ourselves, but we also ate out at the restaurants quite a few times. So we got all of our groceries in the park. We never left the park to get groceries in some of the bordering towns, where it might be a little bit cheaper. The shops inside the park are a bit more expensive, because it's in a national park, but it's not that much more. So we would buy stuff like charcoal, meat, veggies, bread, snacks, soft drinks, beer, wine and gin. So literally anything we would also buy at home. In total, for 3 weeks, we spent 2,952 rand, which is about 150 euros or 165 US dollars. This makes a daily average of 128 rand, which is about 6 euros or 7 US dollars. I would say that is quite cheap, considering that you are staying inside a national park, and usually inside of parks it's always more expensive because you have to bring all the food there. So the next category would be restaurant visits, because we also ate out quite a few times. Sometimes we just got a cappuccino, sometimes we got a röstekoek, which is like a huge sandwich, but the bread is cooked on an open fire and is then stuffed with whatever you like. Cheese, tomato, bacon, whatever. Or we got dinner and drinks at one of the restaurants at the camps where we were staying. In total, we spent more on the restaurant visits than on the groceries. We paid 4,589 rand in total, which is about 230 euro or 260 US dollars. On average, we spent something between 50 rand for just a cup of coffee and 400 rand for a full dinner with cocktails. I think that's still kind of okay, considering that we spent New Year's Eve in the park and we wanted to celebrate. So the next expense would be fuel, because the main activity in Kruger National Park is to go on self-guided game drives. That's why you have to fill up your tank quite a few times. This cost varies a lot, depending on what car you drive, what the fuel consumption is, and how much you decide to drive. We drove a lot compared to other travelers, so probably you would pay less gas. In total, we spent 3,200 rand on gas, which is about 160 euros or 180 US dollars. Next, we will have a look at what activities cost. These expenses are also quite flexible, because we've done a lot of game viewing already, so we are a bit more experienced, and for us it's quite easy to find them. We decided to mostly go on self-guided game drives. Additionally, the field guides of the park take you on a game drive in huge 20-seater trucks, which takes a bit away the feeling of the experience in our opinion. Also, the price varies a little bit, depending on the camp you're booking at. But on average, a game drive costs about 400 Rand per person for a 2 to 3 hour drive. That's about 20 euro or 22 USD. Here you can either go on a morning drive, a sunset drive, or a night drive. You can also book a morning bushwalk, which is about 700 Rand per person. That's about 35 euros or 40 US dollars. If you want to go on a guided game drive, but don't want to book that many, we would definitely suggest to go on a night drive. That's what we did. Because you are not allowed to drive in the park at night by yourself. Because of that, a guided game drive is the only opportunity to observe nocturnal animals. These were also the only costs we paid for activities. We paid 620 Rand for 2 people for a night drive at Satara. Next, we will talk about accommodation. Now it gets interesting, because the costs for accommodation also varies a lot, depending on how you want to stay. On our 23-day trip, we decided to go camping, because that is usually the cheapest option. But in the end, we will also let you know what alternative accommodation types would cost. Because we took a previous trip in winter, where it was just too cold to go camping. On this previous trip, we also stayed at the cheapest accommodation available. That was not camping. And of course, you can also pay more if you want a more luxurious accommodation. Just to let you know, the accommodation in Kruger is quite outdated, so you should not expect the best. On our last camping trip to Kruger, where we stayed more than 3 weeks camping, we decided to go with a small tent and 2 people. Additionally, we always had power at the campsite. This is important because the price may be different if you come with a caravan or if you get a campsite without a power plug. First, we stayed at Crocodile Bridge Rest Camp, which is in the southeastern part of Kruger. Unfortunately, the campsite was already fully booked here, so we decided to book a safari tent instead. The safari tent has a fridge and a braai, but communal kitchens and communal ablutions. Additionally, the safari tent comes without cooking utensils, but you can rent them at the reception for 50 Rand. Then you get glasses, mugs, plates, bowls, cutlery, a braai tong, and a pot and a pan. We stayed 3 nights at the safari tent in Crocodile Bridge for 2,411 Rand, which is about 804 Rand per night. In winter, we stayed at the same safari tent for 760 Rand per night. So you can see that the price may be different considering the season you're traveling. In winter, we also stayed at a bungalow at Crocodile Bridge Rest Camp, which had a private bathroom and a private outdoor kitchen. For this bungalow, we paid 1,740 Rand per night. Coming back to our camping trip. From now on, we only stayed at campsites. Every campsite comes with communal ablutions and a communal kitchen. Our next stop was Pretoria's Cobb Rest Camp. It's a very rustic camp, and I think it's not very popular with tourists, because the game density is quite low compared to other areas in the southern Kruger. Therefore, the camp is quiet and relaxing. We stayed 3 nights and paid 1,300 Rand, which makes 430 Rand per night. Alternatively, you can also stay at a hut. The hut comes with a fridge and a braai, but also has communal kitchens and ablutions. And you don't get utensils either, like in Crocodile Bridge, unless you rent them. For the hut, we paid 760 Rand per night. Afterwards, we stayed at Skukuza, which is known as the capital of Kruger. First, we weren't quite sure if we really wanted to stay here, because it's the largest camp and therefore quite crowded. But the game sightings are just perfect here. We got by far the most and the best sightings at Skukuza. Here you can see it all. We've got lions, leopards, wild dogs, all the big 5, and lots of different antelope species. We decided to stay 4 nights and paid around 1,700 Rand. That's also 430 Rand per night. Then we moved up to Satara, which is known as Cat Camp. Here you will definitely see lions if you decide to stay a bit longer. For 6 nights, we paid 2,600 rand, which is also 430 rand per night. In winter, we stayed at a bungalow in Satara, quite similar to the one in Crocodile Bridge, with a private bathroom and a private kitchen. For the bungalow, we paid 1,740 rand per night. Our final stop was Berchendal Rest Camp, in the far south of the Kruger. Here, you get the best chances to see rhinos. But we also saw lions here, and you get access to very good game viewing roads like the S25. Personally, we liked this campsite the most. It was not very busy, and there were lots of nature. You could even see a lot of wildlife inside the camp, like bushboks, vervet monkeys, and different genets. We stayed for 6 nights and paid 2,300 rand. That is about 380 rand per night. You can see it's already a bit cheaper than the campsites in the beginning of the trip. In total, we paid for our camping trip 10,300 rand for accommodation. That is about 516 euros or 580 USD. Before we come to the total cost of the camping trip, I would just like to give you an idea about the other accommodation types of Kruger. In winter, we stayed at Lower Sabi Rest Camp in a safari tent/bungalow. We had a private bathroom, a private kitchen, and a private outdoor area. And this was by far the nicest accommodation we have stayed in Kruger. Probably because it was relatively new. Here, we paid 1,600 rand per night. Speaking of the last Kruger trip, we also stayed further north in the Kruger National Park, like in Mopani Rest Camp. At Mopani Rest Camp, we also booked a bungalow with a private bathroom and a kitchen, but it had 2 single beds and 2 bunk beds. But we ended up paying only for 2 people, so we paid 1,500 rand per night. At Chingwetsi Rest Camp, we stayed at a hut, similar to the one at Pretorius Kop. It had a fridge and a braai, but no utensils and shared ablutions and shared kitchens. Here, we paid 722 rand per night. And finally, we stayed at a bungalow in Punda Maria. It had a private bathroom, a fridge and a braai, but the kitchen was shared. Here, we paid 1,225 rand per night. And last but not least, you have to pay a conservation fee to enter the park. And here you can save a lot. If you are planning a longer trip, you should definitely purchase a wild card. The wild card gives you access to more than 80 national parks and reserves in southern Africa. So you can not only visit the Kruger with the wild card, you can also go to Addo Elephant National Park or Table Mountain National Park. The normal entrance fee for the Kruger for South Africans is 122 rand. For internationals, it would be 486 rand. If you want to purchase a wild card, you can either purchase it for one person, for a couple, or for a family. The wild card for a South African cost 835 rand per year. And for internationals, it would be 3,780 rand. So after just 8 days in the park as an individual, or after 6 days as a couple, it is cheaper to get a wild card. You can easily book it on Sunpark's website, and it's valid for 1 year. Now, as the video comes to an end, we are summarizing the costs of our 23-day trip to Kruger, including fuel, accommodation, food, and entrance fees. We just paid a little over 27,000 rand, which is about 1,400 euros or 1,500 USD. If you're coming from abroad, you should always calculate that you would need additionally a rental car and international flights. Yes, that is a lot of money. But considering the fact that a stay for 2 people for 2 nights at a private lodge is about the same price, I think that's kind of fair. Have you guessed that we paid more or less than that? Let us know in the comments.